The blood on Captain Bobby Killian's glove wasn't his own. It belonged to the 19-year-old kid whose P-47 had just exploded 300 feet below him over the French countryside, and in that frozen moment at 8,000 feet, with pieces of aluminum and human beings spiraling through the morning sky like deadly confetti, Bobby understood with crystalline clarity that he was already dead. It was just a matter of when. March 14th, 1944, 13:47 hours. Somewhere over occupied France, 40 miles southwest of Paris. The German Focke-Wulf 190 that had killed Jimmy Holbrook was pulling up now, climbing with an arrogance that made Bobby's entire body shake with impotent rage. The bastard's aircraft, painted in mottled gray-green camouflage with a yellow nose that marked him as a veteran, moved through the air like a predator that knew it owned this altitude, this airspace, this entire goddamn war. Bobby shoved his throttle forward, feeling the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 behind him roar in response, all 2,000 horsepower screaming through 18 cylinders. But he already knew the truth that was eating him alive from the inside out. Down here, at this altitude where the air was thick as soup, where the wounded B-17s limped home trailing smoke and prayers, his P-47 Thunderbolt was a sledgehammer trying to catch a switchblade. The FW-190 was faster. Not by much, maybe 15-20 miles per hour, but in combat, that difference was the distance between living and dying, between going home to write letters you'd never send and becoming a statistic in some general's morning briefing. Jimmy Holbrook had learned that lesson 30 seconds ago. Now he was learning nothing at all. Bobby's radio crackled with static and panic. "Blue 3 is hit! Blue 3 is—" The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by the sound of another pilot's breathing, heavy and ragged, the sound of a man watching his friends die and knowing he might be next. "Tighten up, Blue Flight!" Bobby barked into his radio, his voice steadier than he felt. "Stay with the bombers! Don't chase them down!" But even as he gave the order, he wanted to disobey it himself. Every instinct screamed at him to push the stick forward, to dive after that yellow-nosed son of a bitch and make him pay for Jimmy, for all of them. But doctrine was doctrine for a reason. Their job wasn't to hunt German fighters. Their job was to protect the bombers, to be the shield, not the sword. And at low altitude, against FW-190s that could outrun them and outturn them, chasing would only add more names to tomorrow's casualty list. The formation of B-17 flying fortresses they were escorting lumbered ahead, massive four-engine bombers that looked invincible from a distance but up close revealed their wounds, engines trailing smoke, fuselages punctured with flak holes you could put your fist through, hydraulic fluid streaming behind them like blood from a gut-shot animal. These aircraft had just bombed a railroad marshalling yard outside Paris. Now they were trying to make it back to England, and Bobby's job was to make sure they did. Another FW-190 flashed past, close enough that Bobby could see the pilot's face, or rather, the leather mask and goggles that made him look less human and more like some mechanical extension of his aircraft. The German didn't fire, just sped past in a blur of gray-green metal, and Bobby understood the tactic immediately. They weren't trying to shoot down every escort fighter. They were probing, testing, looking for the weak spots in the formation where they could slip through and savage the bombers. And we can't stop them, Bobby thought bitterly. Not down here, not where they're faster. His P-47, Dorothy's Defiance, named after his wife back in Nebraska, who wrote him letters that smelled like home and hurt worse than shrapnel, was a magnificent aircraft at high altitude. Up at 25,000 feet, where the air was thin and cold and the turbocharged engine could breathe properly, the Thunderbolt was a monster. It could outrun anything, outdive anything, absorb punishment that would tear apart a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt. But down here, in the thick air below 10,000 feet, the four-bladed propeller that gave them such tremendous high-altitude performance became a liability. It was designed for thin air, not this heavy atmosphere. The blades couldn't bite efficiently. The massive engine was producing power that the propeller couldn't translate into speed. They were driving a sports car in deep mud. The flight back to England took 43 minutes, though it felt like hours. Bobby lost count of how many times German fighters made passes at the formation. They shot down another bomber. He watched it spiral away with two engines on fire, tiny figures bailing out, parachutes blooming like flowers in a garden of death. Some of them would be captured. Some would be shot by angry French civilians who couldn't tell American uniforms from German ones at a distance. Some would just disappear into the countryside and never be heard from again. When the white cliffs of Dover finally appeared on the horizon, Bobby felt nothing resembling relief. Relief was for people who'd accomplished something. He'd just spent 2 hours flying escort while men died around him, unable to do a damn thing about it. RAF Bodney appeared below them 20 minutes later, a sprawl of runways and hangars and Quonset huts carved out of the Norfolk countryside, home to the 352nd Fighter Group, Bobby's unit. He brought Dorothy's Defiance around in a wide circuit, dropping landing gear and flaps, feeling the big fighter slow and settle. The wheels kissed the runway with a chirp of rubber, and he taxied toward the hard stand where his crew chief would be waiting. The engine coughed and died. Silence rushed in to fill the vacuum, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of hot metal cooling and the distant sound of other aircraft landing. Bobby sat in the cockpit for a long moment, not moving, staring at his blood-stained glove. Jimmy's blood. A kid from Iowa who'd enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, who carried a photograph of his girlfriend and talked about opening a hardware store after the war. There wouldn't be a hardware store now. There would be a telegram and a folded flag and a mother who would never be the same. Bobby finally climbed out of the cockpit, his legs shaky, and found his crew chief waiting, a tech sergeant named Morrison, who had the perpetually oil-stained hands of a man who spoke to engines better than he spoke to people. "How'd she run, Captain?" Morrison asked, already walking around the aircraft looking for damage. "Like always," Bobby said. "Perfect up high, useless down low." Morrison paused, glanced at him. "Lost someone today?" "Jimmy Holbrook." Morrison nodded slowly, said nothing. There was nothing to say. They'd both been through this ritual too many times. Names became memories, became ghosts. The only thing that changed was the roster in the operations shack. Bobby walked toward the debriefing hut, but he couldn't make himself go inside yet. Instead, he veered toward Hangar 7, drawn by something he couldn't name, maybe the need to be around machines instead of men, around things that could be fixed with wrenches instead of words. The hangar was mostly empty at this hour. The day shift mechanics had gone to dinner. But in the back, under the harsh glow of work lamps, 2 figures were hunched over an engine, and Bobby recognized them. Staff Sergeant Tommy Reeves and Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb, the night shift crew who kept the fighters flying while everyone else slept. Bobby grabbed an empty oil drum, flipped it over, and sat down. He pulled out a Lucky Strike, lit it with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and just watched them work. There was something hypnotic about it, the way their hands moved with absolute certainty, the way they communicated in half-sentences and gestures, a private language developed through countless hours working together. Tommy looked up after a while, noticed Bobby sitting there. "Evening, Captain. You okay?" "Lost another guy today," Bobby heard himself say. "Jimmy Holbrook. Good kid. 19 years old." The mechanics stopped working. Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Tommy set down his wrench carefully, as if it were made of glass. "We were coming back from a bomber escort over Frankfurt," Bobby continued, the words spilling out now, needing to be said. "These FW-190s came up underneath us. They always do that, climb up from below where we can't see them easily. Jimmy was flying at 8,000 feet, and one of them just appeared. Put a 20mm round right through his canopy." He took a long drag on his cigarette, watching the ember glow brighter. "The thing is, we can't catch them down there. Not at low altitude. The FW-190s, they're faster than us below 10,000 feet. Their radial engine, that BMW 801, it performs better in the thick air down low. Our Thunderbolts are magnificent up high, but down where the fights actually happen, where we have to protect the bombers coming home shot to hell, we're sitting ducks. We can't run, can't turn with them, can't do a goddamn thing except take the hits and hope we make it home." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with the implications of what Bobby had just said. This wasn't just complaining. This was a pilot identifying the specific technical limitation that was killing his men. Tommy stared at the P-47 sitting in the hangar, its massive bulk somehow vulnerable in the harsh lighting. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite an idea yet, but the shadow of one. the way lightning flashes in the distance before the thunder arrives. "What if?" Tommy said slowly. "The problem isn't the airplane itself, but what we're asking it to do with the wrong equipment." Bobby looked at him. "What do you mean?" "That propeller," Tommy said, pointing at the four-bladed unit on the nearest P-47. "It's designed for high altitude, for thin air. Down low, it's working too hard, can't bite efficiently. But what if we changed it?" Marcus was nodding now, catching on. "The Razorback C models," he said. "They use three-bladed props, smaller diameter, different pitch." "Right," Tommy said, his voice gaining energy. "What if we swapped one onto your bird, just to test? The three-bladed prop would bite better in thick air, let that big engine actually transfer its power into speed instead of wasting it pushing the wrong propeller through the wrong atmosphere." Bobby stood up slowly, cigarette forgotten. That's not standard procedure. Hell, that's not even close to regulation." "No, sir, it's not," Tommy agreed. "But neither is dying at 19 because your airplane can't do what you need it to do." The three men stared at each other in the dim hangar. And in that moment, everything changed. The rain started at 2147 hours, hammering the corrugated tin roof of Hangar 7 like machine gun fire. And Tommy Reeves took it as a sign. Though whether it was a good sign or a warning from God himself, he couldn't say. RAF Bodney, Norfolk, England. March 14th, 1944. Night shift. The hangar was a cathedral of shadows and sick yellow light, the work lamps casting long fingers of illumination across the oil-stained concrete floor. Dorothy's Defiant sat in the center like a patient on an operating table, her massive radial engine already exposed, cowling panels removed and stacked carefully against the wall. The four-bladed propeller, the standard-issue Hamilton Standard unit that every P-47D carried, gleamed dully in the lamplight, soon to be removed, soon to become obsolete. Tommy's hands weren't shaking yet, but they would be. They always did when the magnitude of what he was doing finally settled into his bones. This wasn't routine maintenance. This wasn't authorized repair work. This was mutiny dressed up in mechanics' coveralls, rebellion with a torque wrench, and if it went wrong, if the propeller separated in flight, if the modification caused an engine failure, if Captain Killian died because of what they were about to do, then Tommy and Marcus would spend the rest of the war in Leavenworth Military Prison, if they were lucky. "Last chance to back out," Marcus said, reading Tommy's thoughts the way he always did after 3 years of working side by side, night after night, while the rest of the base slept and dreamed and pretended the war wasn't real. Tommy looked at his partner, Marcus Webb, a man who'd grown up in Chicago's South Side, who'd learned to fix cars in an uncle's garage because the good jobs weren't available to black mechanics, who'd joined the Army Air Forces and found himself assigned to night shift maintenance where his brilliant mechanical mind could serve the war effort without making white officers uncomfortable during daylight hours. Marcus had more natural engineering talent in his left hand than most aviation school graduates had in their entire bodies, but the world had decided his skin color mattered more than his skill. The world was stupid, Tommy had concluded long ago, and tonight, they were going to prove it. "We're not backing out," Tommy said. "Get the wreck ready." In the far corner of Hangar 7, partially hidden behind a canvas tarp, sat what remained of P-47C tail number 428066. 2 weeks ago, it had been a functional fighter. Then Lieutenant Morrison, no relation to the crew chief, had misjudged his landing approach in heavy fog, touched down too hard, and collapsed the landing gear. Morrison had walked away with bruised ribs and a bruised ego. The aircraft had been cannibalized for parts, its useful life ended, its body now serving as an organ donor for machines still fighting. But that wreck had one component they needed: a three-bladed propeller from the earlier C-model production run, 11 feet 2 inches in diameter instead of 12 feet 2 inches, 3 blades instead of 4, a completely different pitch angle, designed before the engineers had optimized everything for high-altitude performance and inadvertently sacrificed low-altitude capability in the process. Marcus pulled the tarp away, revealing the wrecked P-47's nose section. The propeller was still attached, and even in death, even bent and scarred, it looked purposeful, aggressive, like a weapon waiting to be wielded. You know what bothers me most? Marcus said as they began the delicate process of removing the propeller from the wreck. It's not that we might get court-martialed, it's that we probably should have thought of this months ago. How many pilots died because we didn't? Tommy had been thinking the same thing, and it sat in his gut like spoiled food. We're thinking of it now, he said quietly. That's what matters. The work was slow, methodical, demanding absolute precision. A propeller wasn't just bolted to an engine. It was integrated into a complex system of reduction gears, governors, and hydraulic controls that regulated pitch, managed stress, and prevented the kind of catastrophic failures that turned aircraft into falling coffins. One misaligned spline, one improperly torqued bolt, one piece of debris in the wrong place, and they'd be signing Captain Killian's death warrant with their own hands. They worked in near silence. The only sounds the clink of tools, the hiss of pneumatic wrenches, and the relentless drumming of rain on tin. Tommy's back ached, an old injury from a car accident in Pennsylvania, before the war, before everything changed and the whole world caught fire. He'd been 23 then, newly married to Sarah, working in a garage, planning a future that seemed solid and real. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and the future became something you couldn't plan for, only survive toward. Around midnight, they had the three-bladed propeller free from the wreck. It was heavier than it looked. Nearly 200 pounds of forged aluminum and steel. Every ounce of it critical. Every surface machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. They wheeled it over to Dorothy's Defiance on a rolling cart, moving with the careful reverence of men transporting something holy. You ever think about what happens if this works? Marcus asked as they positioned the cart beside the P-47's nose. I mean really works. If Captain Killian takes this bird up and suddenly he can catch those FW-190s, can turn the tables at low altitude, what happens then? Tommy paused, considered. Then we do it to every P-47 in the group. Every P-47 in England, maybe? We change how the air war works. Yeah, Marcus said softly. 2 night shift mechanics change the whole goddamn war. They'll probably give the credit to some colonel who had nothing to do with it. Probably, Tommy agreed. But the pilots will know. Captain Killian will know. And the next kid who doesn't die because his airplane could finally do what he needed it to do. He'll never know our names. But he'll be alive. That's enough. Marcus smiled, a small, sad expression that contained years of accepting less than he deserved. Yeah, he said. That's enough. The removal of the 4-bladed propeller took 90 minutes. Every bolt had to be documented. Every safety wire carefully removed and preserved, every measurement recorded. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it right. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no room for the kind of mistakes that killed people. When the 4-bladed unit finally came free, they lowered it carefully to the floor using a chain hoist. And for a moment, Dorothy's Defiance looked naked, vulnerable, her massive engine exposed without the propeller to give it purpose. The reduction gearbox jutted forward like an incomplete thought waiting to be finished. Here we go, Tommy said, and they began the installation of the 3-bladed propeller. The work required absolute focus. The splines on the propeller hub had to align perfectly with the splines on the reduction gearbox. 48 teeth that had to mesh exactly. No force, no persuasion, just perfect alignment and a gentle slide home. Tommy guided it in while Marcus supported the weight, and when the splines engaged with a satisfying mechanical click, Tommy released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The mounting bolts came next, 16 of them, each torqued to exactly 85 foot-pounds, no more, no less. Too loose, and the propeller could shift in flight, destroying the reduction gearbox and possibly tearing free entirely. Too tight, and they'd strip the threads or crack the mounting flange, weakening it until stress fractures caused the same catastrophic failure they were trying to prevent. Tommy used his calibrated torque wrench, feeling each bolt reach the precise specification, hearing the wrench click when the correct tension was achieved. Beside him, Marcus double-checked every single one, because in this work, trust wasn't enough. Verification was everything. They installed new safety wire next, threading stainless steel wire through drilled holes in each bolt head, then twisting it tight with pliers in a specific pattern that would prevent any bolt from backing out due to vibration. The safety wire was tedious, demanding work that left their fingers aching, but it was also beautiful in its way, a visible manifestation of the principle that prevented disaster through attention to detail. By 0300 hours, the installation was complete. The three-bladed propeller sat mounted on Dorothy's Defiance, looking somehow different from any P-47 Tommy had ever seen. It looked leaner, more aggressive, like a fist that had been closed tighter. "It looks wrong," Marcus observed, tilting his head. "Naked, almost. Like we took something away instead of adding something." "It looks like survival," Tommy replied. "It looks like maybe Captain Killian comes home tomorrow." They spent another hour checking their work, inspecting every connection, every surface, looking for anything they might have missed. Tommy ran his fingers along the propeller blades, feeling for any nicks or damage that could cause imbalance at high RPM. Marcus checked the pitch control mechanism, ensuring the hydraulics could still adjust the blade angle properly. They measured the ground clearance, tighter now with the smaller diameter, but still within acceptable limits as long as Killian was careful during takeoff and landing. Finally, at 0430 hours, with dawn beginning to lighten the eastern horizon from black to deep purple, they stood back and looked at what they'd done. "We need to tell Captain Killian before the day crew arrives," Marcus said. "Before someone else sees this and starts asking questions we can't answer." They found Bobby in the officers' mess, sitting alone with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at nothing. He looked up when they approached, and something in their faces must have communicated everything, because he stood immediately without saying a word. The three of them walked back to Hangar 7 together, through the pre-dawn quiet of a military base beginning to wake. Jeeps rumbled past carrying bleary-eyed airmen toward the flight line. Somewhere, a radio was playing Glenn Miller. The air smelled of aviation fuel and wet grass, and the particular dampness of England in March, that season between winter and spring that felt like the war itself. Neither ending nor beginning, just continuing endlessly. When Bobby saw the three-bladed propeller on his aircraft, he stopped walking. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing, his face unreadable in the gray light filtering through the hangar doors. "Explain," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. Tommy did, laying out the engineering logic, the physics of propeller efficiency in different air densities, the potential advantages at low altitude. He spoke clinically, professionally, keeping emotion out of it. But when he finished, he added something that came from somewhere deeper than technical knowledge. 37 missions, sir. You've survived 37 missions in this bird. But Jimmy Holbrook didn't survive his 16th. And the reason, the only reason, is that the FW-190s can outrun us where it matters, down low where the real fighting happens. So Marcus and I, we figured, maybe we could change that. Maybe we could give you a chance to catch those bastards when they come up from below. Maybe we could help bring you home. Bobby reached out slowly, ran his hand along one of the propeller blades, his fingers tracing the leading edge. "This isn't regulation," he said quietly. "This isn't even close to regulation." "No, sir," Tommy agreed. "But neither is dying at 19 because your airplane can't do what you need it to do." Bobby looked at them both, really looked at them, seeing them perhaps for the first time as something other than mechanics, as the men who'd just risked everything to give him a fighting chance. "When can we test it?" he asked. "Right now," Marcus said. "The engine's cold, but we can run it up, check for vibration, make sure everything's balanced. If it looks good, you could fly a test hop this morning." Bobby nodded slowly, then smiled. Not a happy smile, but something fierce and grateful. "Let's see if two night shift mechanics just change the war." The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 coughed once, belched blue smoke, then roared to life with a sound that made Tommy's chest vibrate. 18 cylinders of American engineering screaming defiance into the dawn, and for the first time in months, he felt something dangerous stirring in his heart that might have been hope. RAF Bodney, Norfolk, England, March 15th, 1944, 0612 hours. Captain Bobby Killian sat in Dorothy's Defiance's cockpit, his hands light on the controls, feeling the entire aircraft tremble with barely contained power as the modified three-bladed propeller bit into the cold morning air. Through the canopy, he could see Tommy and Marcus standing beside the hangar, their faces pale in the early light, watching with the intensity of men who'd bet everything on a single roll of the dice. Bobby advanced the throttle slowly, bringing the RPM up, listening to the engine's voice, feeling for any vibration that would indicate imbalance, any roughness that would suggest their midnight modification was about to tear itself apart and take him with it. The propeller spun faster, becoming a transparent disc, and the note of the engine changed, higher, sharper, more aggressive than he'd ever heard it before. No vibration, no roughness, just pure, clean power. He let it run for 5 minutes at various power settings, checking every gauge, monitoring oil pressure and cylinder head temperature and manifold pressure, looking for any sign of trouble. Everything was perfect. Better than perfect. The engine was purring like it had found its true purpose after years of being misunderstood. Bobby pulled the mixture to idle cutoff, and the engine died with a final cough. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own heartbeat, fast and hard against his ribs. He climbed down from the cockpit and walked over to where Tommy and Marcus waited. "Well?" Tommy asked, trying to keep his voice steady and failing completely. "It's smooth," Bobby said. "Smoother than the 4-bladed unit, actually. But we won't know if it works, really works, until we take it up and push it hard." "When?" Marcus asked. Bobby glanced at his watch. "Briefing is at 800. We've got a bomber escort mission to Augsburg. I'll test it then, in combat." Tommy's eyes went wide. "Sir, we should do a proper test flight first. Put it through its paces in controlled conditions." "We don't have time for controlled conditions," Bobby interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Every day we wait is another day the FW-190s own the low-altitude fight. Another day someone like Jimmy Holbrook doesn't come home. If this works, I need to know now. If it doesn't work," he shrugged, "then I won't be around to get court-martialed with you." The briefing at 800 was routine, another deep penetration mission into Germany, escorting B-17s to bomb the Messerschmitt production facilities at Augsburg. Intelligence expected heavy fighter opposition. They always expected heavy fighter opposition. Sometimes intelligence was right. Bobby sat in the back of the briefing room, only half listening to the major droning on about waypoints and timing, his mind elsewhere. He was thinking about Jimmy Holbrook, about the moment the kid's P-47 had disintegrated in a ball of flame. He was thinking about all the other pilots who died in the same way, caught low and slow, unable to run, unable to fight, just dying while their aircraft failed to do what they needed it to do. That ends today, Bobby thought. One way or another, that ends today. Takeoff was at Aero 9:45. Bobby strapped into Dorothy's Defiance with hands that were steady now, that had found their certainty somewhere in the night between fear and action. The modified propeller sat before him, 3 blades instead of 4, looking wrong and right at the same time, looking like revolution disguised as maintenance. The tower cleared him for takeoff. Bobby released the brakes and pushed the throttle forward, and Dorothy's Defiance lunged down the runway with an eagerness that was immediately, viscerally different. The acceleration was sharper, more aggressive. The 3-bladed prop was biting into the thick runway-level air with a hunger the 4-bladed unit had never possessed. Rotate speed came faster than expected. Bobby pulled back gently on the stick, and the P-47 leaped into the air like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. The climb rate was noticeably better, maybe 500 feet per minute more than standard, and as they climbed through 5,000 feet, Bobby felt something he hadn't felt in months. The sense that his aircraft was a weapon again, not just a shield. The flight to Augsburg took 2 hours. The bomber stream was massive today. Nearly 200 B-17s arranged in tight combat boxes, their 50 caliber machine guns bristling from every angle, each fortress protecting its neighbors, the entire formation a porcupine made of aluminum and courage, and boys who should have been in college. Bobby's flight, Blue Flight 4 P-47s, took up position above and behind the bombers, weaving back and forth in a pattern designed to cover the most vulnerable approach angles. The sky was crystalline blue, visibility unlimited, the kind of day where you could see death coming from miles away. The German fighters appeared at 11:47 hours. They came up from below, as they always did. A dozen Focke-Wulf 190s, maybe more, gray-green sharks rising from the earth, their yellow noses marking them as veterans, as killers. Bobby's radio exploded with voices. "Bandits! 6 o'clock low! I count 15. No, 20. They're going for the bombers! Blue flight engage! Engage!" Bobby rolled Dorothy's Defiance inverted and pulled, diving toward the attackers, his vision graying at the edges as G-forces compressed his body into the seat. The FW-190s were climbing toward the bomber formation, and in that moment, Bobby understood that everything depended on whether two night shift mechanics had been brilliant or insane. He pushed the throttle to the firewall and dove after the lead German fighter. The acceleration was immediate, shocking, like being kicked by God. The three-bladed propeller was screaming now, tearing through the thick air at 8,000 feet with an efficiency that transformed every ounce of the R-2800's power into pure forward velocity. The FW-190 was fast, but Dorothy's Defiance was faster. For the first time in the entire war, at low altitude, a P-47 was catching a FW-190. The German pilot must have sensed something wrong because he broke left, hard, pulling tight enough that his wingtips traced visible vortices in the air. Bobby stayed with him, the modified P-47 responding with an agility that shouldn't have been possible, the smaller propeller reducing drag and improving the aircraft's ability to maneuver. "Blue leader, what the hell?" one of his wingmen called. "How are you staying with him?" Bobby didn't answer. He was too busy flying, too busy watching the German fighter fill his gun sight, too busy squeezing the trigger and feeling the 8.50 caliber machine guns in Dorothy's Defiance's wings come alive, sending tracers reaching out across 500 yards of empty air to touch the FW-190 with fire. Pieces flew off the German fighter, aluminum skin, part of the canopy. The FW-190 rolled right, trying to disengage, but Bobby stayed with him, firing again, walking his rounds up the fuselage. Smoke began streaming from the BMW 801 engine. The canopy flew off, and Bobby saw the pilot bail out, his parachute blossoming white against the blue sky. "Blue leader got one," someone shouted. "Holy shit, Blue leader splashed a 190 at 8,000 feet. But Bobby wasn't listening. He was already looking for the next target, already understanding what Tommy and Marcus had given him. The ability to fight at the altitude where fights actually happened, where the war was actually being won or lost. Another FW-190 flashed past, and Bobby reversed hard, feeling Dorothy's Defiance respond like a fighter half her weight. The German realized too late that he couldn't run anymore, couldn't rely on superior low-altitude speed to escape. Bobby closed to 300 yards and fired, and the FW-190 exploded, just disintegrated in mid-air, transformed from a living machine into falling debris in the space between heartbeats. The dogfight lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, Bobby had shot down 3 FW-190s confirmed, probably damaged 2 more. Blue Flight hadn't lost anyone. The bombers had made it through to the target with minimal losses. And most importantly, German fighter pilots were learning that the rules had changed, that the low-altitude sanctuary they'd owned for 2 years was suddenly contested ground. The flight back to England was quiet. Bobby's hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away, leaving behind exhaustion and something that might have been joy. He kept glancing at the 3-bladed propeller, at the modification that had transformed his aircraft from victim to victor. When he landed at Bodny, the entire squadron was waiting on the hard stand. Word had spread somehow that Blue Leader had shot down 3 190s at low altitude, that something impossible had happened. Bobby climbed out of the cockpit and found Tommy and Marcus standing at the front of the crowd, their faces asking questions they couldn't voice in front of 50 people. "It works," Bobby said simply. "Jesus Christ, it works." Tommy felt his knees go weak. Marcus grabbed his shoulder to steady him. Colonel Briggs pushed through the crowd, scowling. "Killian, what the hell did you do to your aircraft? That propeller is non-standard." "That's not—" "Sir," Bobby interrupted. "With respect, whatever regulations we broke, we need to break them on every P-47 in this group. Today, tonight, right now." He turned to face the assembled pilots. "This modification gives us speed at low altitude. Real speed, combat speed. The FW-190s can't run from us anymore." The colonel stared at him, then at the propeller, then at Tommy and Marcus. "Who authorized this?" "Nobody, sir," Tommy said, stepping forward. "I did it. Sergeant Webb helped." Captain Killian didn't know until it was already done. If there's going to be court-martials, start with me. Briggs looked at the three of them for a long moment. Then he looked at the P-47, at the propeller that had just changed the air war over Europe. Finally, he looked back at Tommy. "Sergeant Reeves," he said slowly, "you're relieved of night shift maintenance duty." Tommy's heart sank. "Effective immediately," Briggs continued. "You're promoted to technical sergeant and assigned to day shift as chief of propulsion modifications. Your first job is to source enough three-bladed propellers to refit every bird in this group within 72 hours. He glanced at Marcus. "Sergeant Webb, you're with him. I don't care if you have to steal them from other units or pull them out of wrecks. Get it done." Tommy stared at him, unable to speak. "Dismissed," Briggs said. Then, more quietly, "Good work, Sergeant." 3 months later, the modifications spread like wildfire through every P-47 unit in the European theater. Fighter groups that had been losing men to low-altitude attacks suddenly found themselves able to fight back. The FW-190 pilots, accustomed to easy escapes, started dying in numbers that shocked the Luftwaffe command. By June 1944, when the invasion of Normandy required round-the-clock fighter cover at low altitude, the modified P-47s, unofficially called Reeves Razors by the pilots who flew them, proved instrumental in achieving air superiority over the beaches. Tommy Reeves never got official credit. The Army Air Forces eventually issued a technical bulletin adopting the modification as standard, attributing it to field testing and engineering analysis. Some colonel in Ohio received a commendation for his innovative thinking. But on November 8, 1944, when Captain Bobby Killian completed his 100th mission and flew home to Nebraska and his wife Dorothy, he stopped in Pennsylvania first. He found Tommy Reeves in a small garage, working on a civilian car, living a life that looked unremarkable from the outside. "Thought you should know," Bobby said, shaking Tommy's oil-stained hand. 43 pilots in my squadron alone made it home because of what you did. 43 men get to see their families again. I'm one of them." Tommy didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing, just nodded and went back to work. Some heroes carry guns. Some heroes carry wrenches. Both kinds win wars. The end.